Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's Friday morning, it's 7:30. I am the fan bearer on the right side of the king. I'm joined by the servant in the place of truth and by the Henemet Nefed Hejet. Of course, the Pharaoh is currently away. He will be joining us later if he is able to get a signal. I hope everybody is doing well. I wasn't here last week. I had some other stuff some family stuff to deal with. Of course, since I was last on, we've had sort of rioting up and down the country. Which, well, firstly, I hope everybody is okay. I hope everybody's safe. I thought it might be interesting to talk about just briefly about the riots, but particularly what if anything has happened locally, and then I suppose I wanted to ramble a bit about how you prevent the riots happening in the first place. So, Stephen, did you do any rioting?
Always up for riot. No, I've been keeping a close eye on it, and keeping a close eye on social media. But there's been nothing around here, thankfully. But you watch the events up and down the country, and it's quite appalling. I was looking back at my Facebook memories, and like 13 years ago, exactly 13 years ago, I was on a business trip to Denmark as there were similar riots. I was living in North London at the time, and I remember being really, really scared that because there was riots in North London that my house was going to get somehow attacked. Yeah, those ones seemed even more serious at the time. But as a resident, you feel absolutely powerless. Now, the last set have been mainly targeted against businesses, haven't they, in kind of to town centres. So it's not people's houses. But when the rioting and looting starts, it's a really scary thing. So there's been no incidents around here, thankfully. No reported incidents. I think the Cambridgeshire is a relatively calm place. I'm not sure how much of it is real. Clearly there were some big incidents, and how much of it is fueled by the media. Watching BBC News last night, and they seem to be spending a lot of time talking to people with grievances and kind of stoking the fuel. And on social media, the last few riots that I've seen have had as many anti right-wing protesters turning up as actual people. So it's an interesting situation, and I do believe people have a legitimate right to protest about anything they want to, but not in a violent way.
I mean, it has been. I don't think we've had anything specific here. Obviously, the protests were just racist, and they were particularly targeted against migrants and anything to do with migrants. But also, it felt like torching a library, going after a citizens' advice bureau, and so on. Alex, I know obviously you've got particular expertise working with migrants and so on. What impact does something like this, or does this thing have on migrants' organisations and on migrants?
Well, I do think it has impact just on like everyday life. I'll give you one example. So on Wednesday, I was working in London. We were interviewing for a new member of staff in one of the organizations I'm working with, which we work on democratic reform, including involving young people, migrants, and so on. And for example, as the person who was organizing some of the interviews and doing the HR, the HR job, basically part of it. For example, I checked before, are you still, do you still feel safe coming into London? Because there were those announcements, various media circulating, and some people will be targeted, some of the offices hosting migrants' rights charities or immigration advisors. So, for example, in this case, I was in a building where there were several organizations, including some political organizations and some organizations working with migrants. So even the fact that it does change your everyday behavior, because if we didn't have this going on, I obviously wouldn't ask the candidates, do you feel safe coming to your job interview in London? Do you need any additional support? So it does change on a very pragmatic level what you do in your everyday life. But then again, I was reflecting on the times I was an immigration advisor and volunteering for different charities. And in my case, I was literally I have maybe it's helpful for people to explain what most people are doing. So most people who actually work in advice, charities, a lot of them are actually volunteers. So for example, many years ago, I had a different job. I often had a job that was, I don't know, in university, teaching, whatever, like another type of job. And in my spare time, because I felt that I could help somehow people from, in that case, the EU, who wanted to stay after Brexit, after the Brexit agreement, I volunteered to help people, who had limited digital skills, for example, to fill in the application, which was all online, or to, just get the information they needed. And often we assume that, there's this assumption like, well, we have to, we're targeting those people because they're all bad people helping migrants to stay, without realizing that many of those people, including there are many British people who are doing this in their free time because they think it's actually important to support each other with information outreach and advice, and not because there's some kind of evil plan to do something very bad about it. And I think that's why to answer your question, it does have a very significant impact, even if you're someone, and I will speak about how it has even more of an impact if you're from a migrant community. But even if you're someone who is, let's say, white British immigration advisor volunteering after your job to give some advice in your local charity, or I don't know, working in a citizens advice bureau, it affects so many people. And of course, there's this constant, I guess, fear that's created for people who are who can be visibly targeted. And by that I mean, me going to London to my job on Wednesday, I personally felt quite safe, because I know walking on the street I wouldn't be a target because of how I appear, right? But if I was, some of my perhaps colleagues or people working who are are from a different ethnicity or race, or who wear a headscarf, like who are at more risk to be targeted. And I think that's very unfair, because you have to think like, okay, someone like me walking down the street has less of a chance to feel the impact of this than some of my colleagues who have been perhaps born in a different country, or even born in the UK but from a different religious or ethnic or racial background. And I think it's just like very scary, I think, for a lot of people, and unfair.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely. I mean, so as my wife's Jewish, so a lot, obviously her family is Jewish, and once people who know me know me, I tend to wear hats. I remember once walking through, in a relatively Jewish area of London, and I just happened to be wearing a black coat and a black hat, and somebody assumed that I was Jewish, and I know that because they used an anti-Semitic epithet to it's just little things like that, and that was just a one-off, and it was a real shock. And it's the sort of fear it engenders, that and feeling you can't go about your sort of normal everyday life has a really corrosive effect. And it's and I'm not, and this was just a one-off by some idiot racist. When you've got that fear all the time, and particularly if you're in one of the cities where the riots have been really nasty, I think it's it can have a really that sort of constant fear you've got walking with you, I think would be really, really difficult to deal with. And
I think sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, so just on your point, I think the most, because of course there's like kind of the immediate impact, destroying public spaces, like, the kind of the violence, the unrest, the kind of racism and Islamophobia expressed in some of the riots. But I think that what's really scary is this like long lasting impact of the feeling that like I don't feel safe in the area I live in. I think that's really, that's really concerning. And I have to say, I think, various agencies, like the police, council workers, like volunteers, faith leaders have been all uniting and doing like a great job, I think, as much as they could in those circumstances, like over the last few days. But I'm really concerned about like what this means overall, like in terms of like longer term, because exactly as you say, like, for example, myself, like I do feel, obviously very sad and anxious about what's happening from like a, you know, what are we doing to our communities and our country perspective. But on a personal level, I'm not as concerned about my own safety as some of my close friends and colleagues are, who feel they are more of a target of those potential, you know, further riots and attacks. But this perception can quickly change. And I think, you know, the example that you gave, for example, what happened to you, and that's like really, you know, horrible to hear like example like this is, for example, myself, I was a few years ago, I rarely speak in Romanian, partly because I don't speak very well in Romanian. But often I speak with my mom on the phone, right? I do speak in Romanian, or like with some of my friends from Romania, but it's very rarely that I do so. But I did have like one time, you know, speaking on the street, and I think I was actually in Brighton, which is like one of the most like, you know, cultural, and I rarely got any negative experience there, really. And someone was like, you know, doing the classic like, oh, you know, why don't you speak English? And although like for me, like in a perspective, I had the reaction of like, I actually responded back, because that's kind of how I am as a person, being like, you know, wait, as I'm literally speaking to my family, would you speak in, you know, in Spanish with your, like, you know, with your British mom if you're in Spain? Like, you know, I kind of like, you know, obviously responded back. I don't think it was a good idea thinking about it. But that moment, although I took it as a joke and like, oh, you know, like someone doing a negative comment, probably like, you know, on the street, that's the kind of thing like stays with you, and then it means you're less likely to behave in the way that is, you know, how you normally behave the next time that you're out. And I think this obviously is a very small example, insignificant compared to how people experience like very real cases of racism and xenophobia. But anything that happens to you as an individual, or even being people, you know, being the people who live in the flats upstairs where some of those shops are attacked, and like actually even witnessing something like this, if I witness something like this on my street, I would be maybe thinking like the next day, maybe I want, you know, to walk with a colleague to work rather than walking on my own. And I think this kind of changes the way we behave in society, and it's not for the good.
No, I mean, I said the other thing, to go back to the example I gave, my wife had to explain to, or at the time fiance had to explain to me, because I didn't understand why somebody was giving me anti-Semitic abuse, and it was to an anti-Semite, you know, anyway. But the other thing, just to pick up on that, one of the things that really, okay, there was a library that was attacked, which particularly bothers me. One, because I'm a regular user of the library, and if you, I will just give a quick plug. If you for Cambridgeshire, there's an app where you can get loads of magazines for free to read on your phone or your tablet, and there's lots of very good veganism magazines on there as well. So go to Cambridgeshire Libraries, check it out. But the libraries are also actually have a really important role in society. They're increasingly a place people go for advice, because there's nowhere else to get advice. And people who work in libraries are amazing, because they're not just doing sort of traditional library science, they're sort of, you know, practically social workers. But it's also one of the only places you can go to sit inside where you don't have to pay any money. And it's where you go if you need help, like filling out a form online or something. It's where a lot of people go, of all, of all sort of classes and conditions, for advice with things. Particularly, it's somewhere that, you know, migrants would go as well. You know, Alex, you know more about this than I do, because you led it. But Cambridgeshire is I think quite good on supporting migrants. But that attack, particularly on the library, where the symbolism of that kind of public space, and I suppose I have a emotional attachment to libraries as a sort of symbol of civilization, where you can go and and basically read any book you want for free, and you can go and look at the archives. And sorry, I'll stop rambling in a minute. If you make an appointment, you can go into the archives in Huntingdon Library, and you can see the original charter for Huntingdon.
Oh, I haven't done that yet, but I have.
Wow.
You make an appointment because it's cool, and they'll I think the archivist, you have to make an appointment. You have to treat it with respect and so on, because it's a fragile document. But it's that it's like, yes, this is a public document, you know, you can have a look at it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have they got the St. Neots market charted there as well? Because I was had a long discussion about that this week. They must have, probably must. If it's going to be anywhere, it'll be there, won't it? I guess.
Don't know.
We'll find out. But that's amazing.
Yeah.
So back to this situation we're discussing. What do you think can be done because we comment about what we think about this and how it affects individuals and communities, but what can be done? Do you think the government responded appropriately? Could anything more have been done in this period of time, and what can be done in the future to perhaps prevent some of the violence we've seen?
So I think there was some concern that the government responded a bit slowly in the beginning, but it doesn't feel like that now, does it? I mean, I think it's a difficult thing to do because it's difficult to understand the scale of what's going on, yeah, and not over responding. So I think lots of people were saying we should have got the army in to break these things up, but of course that sends the wrong message to the far right people who are at the heart of all this, because military responses to what they perceive as legitimate protests is just help serve their victim complex, doesn't it? So I think what we're seeing this week, so I think that I've seen that there's been 400 and nearly 500 arrests. I think 483 arrests, 149 people have charged, and those people have been quite visibly charged as well. So I think what's happening at the moment, that people who not all of the people who get involved in this are far right activists. Yeah, I think there's lots of I think Alistair Campbell described it as like tourism, almost young people who are in the town centre and think it's a fun thing to do, get involved in a bit of looting and rioting. Those people seeing the consequences of what happens if you severely break the law and attack communities, I think is helpful. And to me, it feels, at the moment, it feels like it's on a bit of a downward curve, and that people are starting to understand that, and the whole thing's dying out a little bit, although I'm not sure. So I think that the response I've seen this week has been robust and appropriate, and is starting to deal with the problem as far as I see it.
On the military one is interesting because that's just a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
The thing whereby the military will help the government or local government and military aid to the civil authorities, and the bit for maintenance of law and order is military aid to the civil power as part of that. But the members of the military aren't sworn constables. They don't have powers to detain or arrest people. Yeah. Even the military police only have jurisdiction over the military, people who are subject to military discipline, like, say, I don't know, somebody lives on a base or so, something like that, and to protect military installations. So they can't actually, if military police go and arrest somebody, then it would be it's the same rules as you and I doing it, not a constable doing it. I think I think actually the effect of some reasonably stiff prison sentences coming down really rather quickly has probably had a salutary effect. I think the weather has as well. Now there are, of course, lots of causes behind these these riots where people go into them. I'm going to be honest. I think a part of it is the people who are engaged in this are the people who would have been engaged in football hooliganism at some point. Now, there's also a sort of lot of misunderstanding, shall we say, about immigration and migrants' rights and what the state does and so on. And I get that people are angry and displaced at the moment because of the economic situation isn't great and so on. There is also so I suppose what I'm getting at is there isn't a single response, because you have the short-term response, but then you also need medium and longer-term responses. One of the things is social media. We've got I can't remember what the law is, the Online Communications Act or something like that, which may have an effect. But to be frank, you've got a real problem with one particular social network, the social network formerly known as Twitter. But you've also got some politicians behaving really quite irresponsibly.
Yeah,
and also
on both
Sorry?
sides. On both sides as well. Some. You know, there was I think a Labour councillor, but a left-wing councillor who made some quite atrocious comments. Who's been arrested. I think he talked about slitting the throats of protesters and has been arrested for threat to murder, which is, you know, I think quite appropriate for him to be arrested.
Or I think incitement.
Okay, yeah.
And then you've also got, of course, the comments from Mr. Farage. Now you know you're always going to have, you know, if you don't have Twitter, people will be using Telegram or something. And it may be that because so much has been done on Twitter out in the open, more people will be getting their collar felt. But the sort of response to that has to be quite broad ranging. Part of that is I think a role for civil society in challenging some of the just the nonsense that people are coming out with. I think there's a need for education, and I mean education broadly defined, in terms of like how do people, and I suppose this is the media literacy thing. When you saw the to begin with, after the tragic murders in Southport, there was a name going round. The name had been made up of the perpetrator, and the person's background had been made up. You know, the person who's been arrested for those crimes in Southport is from Cardiff. You know, and sorry, I just found that all frustrating. But it's trying to get the media literacy through. It's like when you hear something, how do you know that you need to stop and interrogate it? Where did this come from? Is this reliable? And so on. But this leads on to a broad, you know, problem about sort of trusted voices. How do you know, a lot of people don't trust the media, and so on. And then I think there's also a thing in terms of providing services and people's economic situation matters. I'm hesitant to go on to the next one. There's also how civil society responds in terms of protests and things like that. Because I say I'm hesitant because it was sort of a lot of that. My PhD was about opposition to the far right, so I can go on for far too long. But the modality of those protests matters, and in a way, if you're organising a group to oppose racism after you've had a big racist event, it's too late. You should have done it years ago. But also having a big protest and then going away doesn't help. Having an anti-racist protest that turns violent doesn't help. But also, if it's perceived to be not of the immediate area and people have come in from outside to organise it, it makes its legitimacy less because people don't see it as autochthonous. Anyway, that's been a bit of a ramble from me, but thoughts?
In terms of whether it's too late or not, I've been my mood has been incredibly buoyed by some of the counter protests, which haven't been violent as far as I've seen. So especially one in Brighton, where I think, you know, a small group of far right protesters stand up and were met by hundreds, if not thousands, of people, you know, opposing them as well in a peaceful way. And so I think it is important to see that, and I think, you know, it comes back to the social media thing again, is that I've talked to people who think that the kind of anti-immigration view is the majority view in this country, and I don't think it is. We've seen the rise of reform in the general election, but I don't think most people feel that way, and it's difficult to see that sometimes in social media, especially in some of the, you know, social media groups. Local social media groups are sometimes quite self-selecting, aren't they? And they turn into echo chambers. And we have people in St Neots who absolutely think that most people in the country, you know, are anti-immigration. And I think you have to say it's fair for people to be concerned about immigration, and it's a legitimate view for them to hold. But it's just kind of the genesis of these whole protests based around false information about the awful Southport murders. And I can only imagine what it must feel like for the families of those people, you know, who are dealing with the most horrible grief and now seeing the whole thing kick up into massive civil unrest, and that's pretty distasteful on top of everything else. But yeah, I think it's important to see both sides of the debate, and that people do see that everybody doesn't feel like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's legitimate for people to be concerned about any aspect of public policy.
Yeah.
But I think if you say, "Oh, I'm really concerned about immigration," I think that does place an onus on you to go and actually find out what the situation is.
Yeah.
Because the level of misinformation, maybe this is me being wildly optimistic, the level of lack of understanding or misinformation about how immigration works is to the UK is quite remarkable.
And also what the benefits are. I saw a really lovely series of TikToks by a very gentle and calm man about talking about actually why, the reason why we have high immigration, illegal or otherwise, is that there's a demand for it, because we're not reproducing at a high enough rate. We have an aging population. I'm not sure, I need to check the figures, but he was saying that the average old age pensioner costs the state about £25,000 a year, and that you need 2 working age people in terms to generate enough taxes to pay for that. And with a declining kind of population, at the younger end, and an aging population, we have a demographic crisis, and we need people to come here to fuel our economy, to pay our taxes, and to pay for existing pensioners, old age pensioners. Everybody has the idea that you contribute all your life into a pot that you take out of. No, taxpayers today are paying for pensioners. And so on top of the kind of winter fuel thing from Labour, it's an interesting question, and it's a question we need. It's almost like the trans thing. It's a discussion we need to have calmly in our society about what our appetite for immigration is, and what the benefits are and what the negative things are. I mean, I think we're largely pro-immigration people. Having been chair of the county council, Alex has been to some of the citizenship ceremonies for me. We swear in every Monday as county council chairman. We swear in about 50 or 60 new British citizens who've come here. Now in Cambridge, those people tend to be very economically active and working for people like AstraZeneca and ARM. But it's a wonderful thing to see people wanting to come and live their life in this country, and it's sometimes disappointing to see all the negative rhetoric. I think that the stats show that immigrants contribute more to the economy than natural born people on average. It's a debate we have to be able to have calmly and talk about it, because being accused of being a racist because you're anti-immigration isn't particularly helpful either, because it means we can't have the conversation properly.
Well, I think it's really interesting, like how there's sort of generalizing on the different sides of the debate, because I'm not even sure they're both sides, but they're like many sides of the debate. Because one of the things people highlight, for example, the economic contribution of migrants, or cultural contributions, or like just the need for migration economically speaking in so many of our sectors. People are like, wait a minute, we're not like against that. Of course, people who come here through the visa system, through whatever system, and like work in social care or the NHS or at ARM in Cambridge, like obviously no one is against that. So like what we are like against is the
some people are though. Some people don't understand. Do you know some people don't understand the extent to which our economy only works if we can recruit the best people from around the world. If you work in a manual job and you only work with people who relatively low skilled people, then you don't understand that we don't generate enough highly skilled people to fuel our economy and to fuel the growth in the economy we need. Go on, David.
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was going to say that I think I've seen this argument quite a lot, because on X, or formerly Twitter, or social media the last few days, there are lots of people who highlight their positive experiences, saying, well, I was treated by this migrant doctor, and indeed the NHS couldn't survive without migrant workers, or like I worked in this sector with so and so. And almost always the response from people who are concerned or opposing immigration is, but we don't, it's not about them, it's the others, which brings me to the question of why I think it's unhelpful to generalize. Because let's say the people who are rioting in front of asylum hotels, and I think there's just like criminal behavior, right? Like you just can't expect not to have consequences if you're literally trying to burn down hotel and trap people in, and like basically kill people. They're like, let's face it, you're like, committing like a criminal offense. Like people who are saying like, oh no, like we should be listened about our legitimate concerns. I'm like, no, like if I went out, and I like just burned a random building, I would expect to be in prison. That's like the end of, like, because that's what I'm, no, I don't think like, oh, but what were you concerned about to warrant this behavior? But before we go on to like, what I think is very unhelpful is people generalizing, being like, oh, but they're concerned about our asylum system. And I think that's why it's unhelpful to generalize, because you can't put in the same category people who are like out burning down buildings or attempting to burn down buildings with people who might think, well, from a pragmatic point of view, it is best to use another system of asylum accommodation than hotels, because you can have a purely pragmatic argument of how another system would cost less or would even be better for asylum seekers or being able to be processed more quickly or whatever.
Well,
I think then everyone gets lumped into those are people who are against, like asylum seekers in general. But I think what we have seen on the streets are people from the like very small minority of people who are actually, going out, committing criminal offenses and like being on the kind of more extreme end of the opinion. It's not the people who are like, let's rethink the system or let's think if there's a better way to do this. So it's not that kind of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the asylum hotels indicate policy failure.
Mm.
They shouldn't exist. I don't think anybody thinks they're a good idea. They're there because there aren't enough people to do the sort of asylum applications. So yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, what you had was arson, attempted murder, and yes, I think people should people should be accountable for their actions.
What I found the most shocking, because we asked about what reactions we found most shocking, I think out of all of this, and there are many shocking things, but like what surprised me most was actually the Daily Mail headline. After the anti-racist demonstrations and gatherings and meetings, and obviously all the news, national news covered it in quite positive light, I have to say. And the Daily Mail headline was, "Night anti-hate marchers face down the thugs." So I think that was a really interesting framing, because the Daily Mail front page, the headline and the article is actually saying, as I believe it as well, it's like, it's great to see more anti-racists like on the streets outnumbering the people who are, basically hating migrants on the streets. But I was really thinking about like, well, the Daily Mail, after so many years, I literally did like similar to David, like, because I was in academia before. I remember like studying for a few months just headlines of Daily Mail and Daily Express. I read hundreds and hundreds of those over the years about migration and asylum seekers. And I have to think like, after you spend your time for like 20, 30, whatever many decades having headlines about 29 million Romanians and Bulgarians invading the country, people claiming, people coming here to claim benefits, or like kind of like stoking up this division, and then you think like, oh, well done to the anti-racist marchers going against some of the, I guess, narratives that you promoted. So yeah, I just think it's interesting, but it's a good move. I mean, I welcome that. I think if they change their mind, I actually do welcome that. Maybe people are finally persuaded that actually yes, there are more people who are not necessarily like anti-migrant and Islamophobic.
Yeah.
I'm not shocked by any of it. I mean, I've seen it all before. Like 13 years ago, a similar thing was happening, and more than anything else, I think it's tedious, predictable, and just disappointing, and just a symptom of where we are in society at the moment. So I haven't been shocked by any of it, apart from, of course, the murders originally, which have got nothing to do with this. But that was a truly shocking event. But in terms of this, everything that's happened last week, I think it's entirely predictable, and something we'll probably see again. And that's why it's important we have a robust response, and that the country demonstrates its true feelings on this issue, and which is kind of what Alex was saying has happened in some of these counter protests.
I do wonder if part of it of the one of the things that's added Tinder that could be that had the potential then to be sparked off is if you go to a lot of, okay, let me give perhaps a slightly silly example. There's a lot of sort of frustration with the fabric of the state at the moment. Things aren't looking as good as they were because there isn't any money to put it in crude terms. I do wonder if part of this is just things aren't very good for a lot of people, and then that will just push people in. Some people going, you know what, let's have a riot.
Well, I think definitely an element of that, because if you think about it from, like, I guess, a sociological perspective, like if I'm going to risk, obviously, like, you're putting a risk to your own life as well doing some of those actions. Like, it's very unlikely you're in a very comfortable economic circumstance to risk your house and job and everything else by trying to burn down a building. So I do think there's like a correlation. I'm not sure it's not true in every single case, but there's a correlation of like that feeling of like, well, I have nothing to lose. I'm like very upset about a lot of things in my life, and I I associate some of this blame to in this case migration, and I can actually risk being arrested and like doing all those things, which I obviously completely disagree with and condemn. But I can see how someone could arrive at that perception because of basically life not, and economically, but also perhaps in other areas of life not being very good at the moment. And so I think there's a long-term response as well to be addressed in terms of like our economy and like inequality, I think, in general in the country. So it's not only about addressing I think we absolutely have to address in the immediate term some of the misinformation and like fear around migration and asylum, but in the longer term it's about what brings a person from, let's say, perhaps being like someone who appears quite normal like in their work, in their everyday life, to actually doing some of those horrible things on the street. And I think we need to understand it at a deeper level, not only, well, like people who are just wanting a bit of fun, like on, which is not, definitely not like on in the town center. It's also like about some of the deeper reasons that could bring people to do that. So do you want to bring some comments on, David? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm going to have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, or I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Just a comment from Stuart. We've had an authoritative response for sentencing from this government, which is good. I mean, I agree. It is worth pointing out the sentence. It's independent. It's part of the state, but it's not the government doing the sentencing. It is the courts, and it is it is good that is being done quickly. I mean, I'm sure everybody has recognised that it was particularly important for these cases to be dealt with quickly. And obviously, where people plead guilty as they have, it's easier to do things quickly. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to step away because I'm actually going to Warhammer World today, and someone's going to pick me up in a few minutes. And over there, I've got to finish assembling my box of minis to take my army to go and fight Adam.
Well, have fun with that, and I think we had a good discussion. If people have any other comments, or I would say like one last thing, that because people ask like, what can we do locally, especially if you're in an area like Huntington, where luckily we haven't been affected by some of the horrible things happening in other parts of the country. I will actually say, like if you have any neighbors or friends who perhaps feel like a bit more targeted now by some of this violence and hate, just like check on each other, like ask, if people need any support. I've had like a couple of friends contacted me, feeling quite fearful, and like, even having a conversation, like even like, speaking about this like in a nice way could help some people. So I'll just say this to everyone, but I'll let David get on.
Yeah, David, you go. Go, David. Don't.
Right.
Can I just say though, because we're all councillors, and Alex and I are kind of county councillors. I'm also a district councillor. What you don't see behind the scenes is the response of councils and government institutions preparing for this. So I've been briefed by the police this week and by Gold Team people in HTC. So all of the leaders, all the authorities get together and meet to talk about these threats, because they are threats, aren't they? Because it's too late to respond after it happens, and there is a level of preparedness, for any potential civil unrest. But there are no signs of it. The police told me that there's been lots of spurious social media reports, but no actual signs of violence. So I think we live in a fairly calm and restrained part of the country, which I'm thankful for. But there is a level of preparation, and have to big up to the police who are working hard behind the scenes as well. Lots of police officers have been, injured in all of this disgusting unrest, and you have to remember how fragile sometimes our democracy and our society is. And David was talking about how it felt to be confused for a Jewish person and receive anti-Semitic hate, which some of us, I mean, I'm sure, Alex, you understand what it's like to face discrimination, but for a big strapping white lad like me, don't feel it very often as well. But you have to remember just how fragile our democracy is, and especially having lived in North London, lots of those Jewish people, their grandparents or great-grandparents would have been involved in pogroms in Russia, Germany, and Eastern Europe, against Jewish people. And it can happen. And, it's, if you don't calm down, we talked about Tinders and sparks, but if you don't deal with the fire early on, these things can get out of control. So I think the government has responded the new government has responded really well, and almost passed its first test as an administration. Let's see what the coming weeks have to do.
Yeah, I think you make an important point there about kind of the misinformation circulating on social media, because I've seen some of this misinformation about Cambridgeshire in our area and some of the planned activities. But as you say, like so far, like in the county, there hasn't been any, particular incidents or protests. Of course, there was some protest activity in Peterborough recently, which was, peacefully managed. Like the police presence was strong there. So, it has been all fine. In the end, it was quite good to see, like in Peterborough, some of the, like different community leaders meeting with each other and discussing this, like more like longer term response to some of the, racism and Islamophobia we've seen across the country. But as you say, like the councils, like perhaps people don't realize the councils do actually, even if we don't say something every day about it. And often I actually felt quite conflicted about this, because I thought, like, if I go on and say a lot of things like every single day on the social media and so on, do I actually draw even more attention to, I don't know, the area I live in? Or like I don't want people to be more in danger than they are already. So I think there's a fine balance between like how much you draw attention to this. Like, of course, I want to discuss the topic like we're doing today, but I'm not sure what you think, Stephen. Like I was often thinking like, okay, how much should they actually speak about the topic, or draw attention to it, and rather than I just, obviously leaving the police and to do their job and make sure the arrests are made and the, violence is ended.
But it's different from you because you're a magnet for this kind of thing, and I've seen you only have to look. But my views, we talk about Twitter quite a lot this morning. X is my views on X and Twitter is my favorite platform in my little bubble of it. It's all really nice, but I look at some of the comments in your posts continually, especially during general election, and I'm disgusted by them, obviously, as well. So, earlier this week we had statements. I think in the Hunt's Post this week we had statements from both of our new MPs, Ian Sollum and Ben Abisi-Jekti, condemning the violence. And like I read those and like, and of course I support them, but also I feel like there should be no need to condemn these things. I mean, it's important that they do it. I'm sure that's true. But for me, I don't feel the need to make a statement, because in every aspect of my life, I'm kind of anti this kind of thing. So it's important that we all speak up against it. I think it's the truth, but I'd rather not do that with prepared statements, but prepared to do that in my actions every single day, in the way I interact online and what we're doing this morning. It's not an easy thing to talk about. We did think twice about talking about this today, but I think it's important that we have this conversation and show that at least this group of councillors, in fact, every single councillor I've ever talked to or met recently from all sides of the chamber, are opposed to these kind of things.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, because on the one hand, like obviously if you feel like more of a target of such things, like you feel also like less likely to speak about it. But I agree with you. Like I think it's quite shocking that we live in year 2024 and we still need, we feel the need of people to come out with statements such as we condemn all forms of racism. Like, of course you should. I mean, but sadly this is not the case. So I do actually think that all the different MPs across the country who came out and did statements in the press or spoke about this issue, like, they are, entitled to do so. And if I was in that position, probably I would as well, because like, in the sense that you're representing a constituency and all your residents, you should say something on this important topic. However, yeah, I think it's just sad that, like different, councillors or MPs, like, or we as collectively, we feel the need to say, yeah, actually those things should be condemned, when it should just be obvious. It should just be obvious that, criminal behavior should have consequences, like when we have like the rule of law in this country, and that like people who are saying racism or Islamophobic abuse on the streets, or be promoting any sort of violent behavior, like, should not be normalized as a legitimate concern. And I also think like it's very important to actually distinguish between people who actually want to have, a practical conversation about immigration policy, whatever type of policy or policy change, who might have a different view than I have, and it's totally fine. I'm always happy to debate. To people who like just hate me and hate my existence as a person who simply just exists in this country, I think that's like a very different thing, and we have to not to bring them all together under those are the people against immigration or for immigration. There are people who have different views on immigration. There's a small minority of people who just want people like me to be out of the country, and they just hate me just because I exist, not because of anything that I did. And there are people, these are a small minority, but very vocal minority. And then there are people who want to have a conversation, but unfortunately, because we have extreme views being expressed, then people who are like more on the side of like, I actually want to have a discussion, I'm not sure if I agree or disagree with that, feel that they can't really speak about this, or they don't want to speak about those topics anymore, because they feel we are like kind of like polarized opinions so much on this topic, you can't have a decent conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important you do speak up though as well, because I mean, I was quite interested and slightly moved by David's experience about misplaced anti-Semitic abuse. Yeah, because the reality is, for people like me and David, yeah, people who are not really visibly part of any minority group, it's difficult to remember the amount of discrimination that lots of people actually face, and the amount of fear that people face every single day, and we need to be reminded of that. And we all need to be, because the protesters, the rioters come from a place of comfort where they don't see that either as well. And especially as elected representatives, it's important for us to remember and see and consider what it feels like to feel unsafe. Because, being honest, I almost never feel unsafe in this country, or very few times in my entire life. And it's important to remember that some people, like you, Alex, actually sometimes feel that every single day as well. So that's an important aspect of this, is we need to consider that how it must feel from being part of any minority group almost during these sad days.
Indeed. So on other topics, what else is going on Cambridgeshire politics to end with?
Well, it's a bit like, so it's the summer. So I went, so the week before last I went on holiday to Butlins, yeah, which was nice, yeah, obviously an exotic holiday for me. And so I had a week off then, and the week before that I had 30 hours of council meetings, yeah, and after the stupidity of the general election, you recovered quite quickly because you're young. I'm not young, yeah, and I'm just about over it now, but it's taken weeks, for me to get back to the equilibrium of my life. And so you have this mad period of like 30 hours of council meetings in a week, yeah, which is crazy, trying to deal with all this casework, go on holiday for a week, and then you get back into August, which is traditionally a quiet month for not having council meetings, yeah. And almost like everybody steps outside the bubble a bit. And I always go through this kind of summer period wondering, like, you and I both live constantly in this, in the world of local politics, and think about it every single day, and almost every single conversation I have with anybody is about local politics. And then it goes away for a few months, and it's difficult to understand why it's all important. The Mill Road thing was a big thing this week, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's as you, I'm trying to catch up a bit, because I'm like, I'll be away for a few days, and then like I dread to think about the council email inbox every time I'm away for more than one day. I'm like thinking like I'll get back, and I'm never able to catch up. So
no.
Yeah, but the Mill Road Bridge was quite a big news, especially like in Cambridge news. I'm not sure like how. I mean, I've actually seen it on some of the local Huntington groups as well, but not as much. Basically, Cambridgeshire County Council agreed with the claimant in the case to end the legal proceedings that are going on in relation to the closure, proposed closure of Mill Road to traffic, to through traffic. So I think now what's going on to happen from a practical point of view is that the council is rerunning the statutory consultation. And that will run from, let me check, 9th of August until midnight Friday the 13th of September, so a bit longer than the usual 3 weeks or whatever it was before. The 21 days consultation period has been extended to allow extra time because of the summer bank holidays and so on. So yes, I mean, we're going into another period of consultation on Mill Road Bridge from until the 13th of September, and then it will be discussed in the Highways Committee. So another debate to be looking forward to. But yeah, it is. I think it's really interesting to think about those different cases that the council is involved in general. I mean, to make a parallel on whenever like a planning decision is made, perhaps like nationally, and the council like can appeal or like can be involved in terms of like legal cases or not. And I think a lot of the consideration, apart from like obviously do I have like any kind of standing in my arguments legally speaking, or like in the case, is actually can I afford to go through this process as well. I'm not sure exactly like what happened in this case, but I think with a lot of those court cases that go on forever, it's also like a very big financial risk for councils to carry on forever. So I'm not sure what you think. It's not about this particular case. I don't know the details of the case itself, but in general, there's like a financial implication to public money and to council budgets.
Well, it's always disappointing when democratic decisions are decided and sometimes overruled by judges, and in this case, decided between lawyers. Yeah, it's always a symptom of the system not working out properly. And like I've been a councillor for 6.5 years, and from the very first moment I was a councillor at town council, where we take much less important decisions, you were kind of reminded constantly about the consequences of doing things wrongly and making bad decisions. Was it would end up in court and being challenged in court, and we've seen it with this case, and we've seen it with with the incinerator as well. Was decided by the government rather than judges. It's kind of difficult, isn't it? But there was threats of judicial reviews. There's always threats of judicial reviews, especially in planning decisions. Yeah, and it's. I mean, of course, that's really important, that it's a check on our democracy, but it shows that things haven't worked out. I mean, the Mill Road one is a difficult one for me because I don't live in Cambridge. I'm not particularly familiar with the area, and I always feel like an outsider in this debate. I'm not involved. I'm not on highways and transportation either, so I've never been called to vote on this. But it was one of the early decisions of the joint administration when the then, I think, Vice Chair Jerry Bird rebelled against the administration and voted a different way. And the whole thing has been, it's an interesting case because it's one of the things which seems almost like evenly split between both sides of the argument, and it's really, really difficult to determine. And almost like I'm glad I'm not on highways and transportation, because I'd have to spend a lot of time in Cambridge talking to people and talking to residents and talking to business owners before I felt qualified to even vote on this. So it's obviously a clearly very difficult and contentious issue. But obviously something hasn't worked out somewhere. If we've spent all this money, time and money trying to make a decision, it's been bounced back to us. It's difficult. And it doesn't. I don't think it leaves the council looking particularly good or clever either.
It's a difficult one. It's not, again, not specifically about this, but there's so many cases or projects where there are genuinely mixed views and there's no one solution or model or whatever that has a majority support. And then the question is always like, do you want to do this or not? And this happens especially on like kind of big infrastructure projects. And it's really interesting like how we think about this, because like on some projects you can indeed delay it forever and run endless consultations and say, actually, we haven't really had proven any support, and then I go back again and again. I think what actually this does as well in this case, of course, okay, now this stage has ended, we're doing this other statutory consultation, fine. The problem is that I think from my perspective is whether you're someone, I think for most people, like whether you're for or against a specific proposal, it's like some of those things are taking so long. So in a way, I can't help but think, is it better to actually do things a bit quicker? And even if in any case you'd upset some people, and some people will be always against something, rather than like having like something going on for years. And I feel this is with small scale projects as well. Like, you know, I applied, for example, and I'm sure you have as well, those local highways applications. So you apply
Yes.
for like a little double yellow line on like a corner of the road, and I understand why it takes so long, because of all the stages.
I don't. It takes longer and longer every year.
Yeah,
So I understand the way it takes time, but not as much time as it does.
I mean, in terms of consultation, I know like it has to be done. I know that at a certain time period. I know the traffic regulation orders and so on. But I think I now know why certain things take such a long time in terms of consultation and objection periods and so on, because I'm in the council. When I was, you know, before I was in politics, when I was just like, you know, probably living a calmer life outside politics, and let's say if I contact my local council, say like, oh, actually, like when I get out of my house on this road, like I can't really see the traffic because all the cars are parked like on the corner. Can you put some double yellows on the corner? And then it takes like 2 years to get done. Obviously, I can see how I slowly lose my trust in politics.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the issue with like a lot of those things, like is whatever you think about the merits of like for or against about a certain proposal. Like I think in general there's a balance between how much consultation we allow on certain things, or how much, you know, process, as opposed to like, okay, let's get some things done. But then it can become, of course, very difficult and controversial when we speak about big infrastructure things, like, you know, increasing housing targets, or, you know, any kind of piece of infrastructure that you want to build.
But that's what your new government has promised with the planning, is quicker planning decisions as well, which is not gonna, you know, it's not gonna please everybody. But I think when we make decisions, we have to make decisions in a timely manner, and we have to stick with them. So making quick decisions and good decisions, because I mean, I think what we see with Mill Lane is debate never stops, does it? Same with the SDZ stuff. If that had gone ahead, that would never have stopped as well. And so that you have to sometimes draw a line under stuff and move on. Otherwise, we don't make any progress.
Yeah, and either not do it, or like, you know, go with one of the options. Yeah, I think it does kind of reach a point about, because I'm thinking, okay, it's another consultation round, so probably it'll come out, unsurprisingly, quite a mixed view. So then, like, what do you do next? And again, obviously, what you do next is discussed in the highways committee, and the highways committee like votes, you know, for the recommendation or against, or whatever the recommendation is. And of course, like if you don't have anything that's like kind of conclusive, I mean, on Mill Road is very interesting, because it depends on what perspective you see it from. If you see it from like people who live in, you know, Romsey Ward in the immediate area and on Mill Road, as residents, I do think there are like ways to say, well, there's majority support, because, and I think I kind of relate to that, because if you're living on that road or nearby, and it's a road like full of, you know, restaurants, shops, like cafes, like businesses, you know, some of my friends visiting Cambridge from other places were like, oh, I can't believe this road is not like fully like pedestrian area, because it's such a, like one of those roads like you have in other cities, like with, you know, full of restaurants, businesses, cafes, and like people like go and, you know, have a coffee, like have tables on the pavement and so on. But then I can understand how the opinion will always be a mixed opinion if you ask people who are using it from the outside, because it's one of the main routes into Cambridge. And of course, you have different views if you actually use that route for not only for like, you know, walking and going to the local shop, but for the, you know, actually commuting in and out of Cambridge. And then I can understand why people are from other areas, like on other roads, like including in Abbey, in my division, like through Newmarket Road, being like, well, this will only add more traffic to this area, so someone from that area might be against based on that. So I think it's very complicated, but as I said, I think on some of those things they just generally take too long, and I'm afraid of some things there's no way to actually get everyone to agree on something.
It's an example of why we need to have not just on that specific issue, but on general policy, is citizen assemblies. I think where we, you know, properly robust decisions taken by a larger group of people than just us, and trying to represent all views. And they're difficult to arrange, and they did it. I think they did it with the SDZ proposals, but those discussions got largely forgotten, I think, in the big debate afterwards. But I think we need to have a more robust way of dealing with these things. On LHI bids, I got a bit good news, is that for my LHI bid for St Neots, I spent some time earlier this year, it must have been last year, walking around town centre with Liz Owens, who's a lady in a wheelchair, who is an advocate for people for disability rights, and who is the leader of the Access in St Neots initiative about kind of campaign for better accessibility for people with mobility issues and other disabilities. And we got we went around and we marked all the drop curves. She showed me how difficult it was to travel about 0.1 of a mile from the car parks to town centre if you're in a wheelchair, because there's not enough drop curbs, pavements are blocked, and our LHI bid to put in new pavement services and drop curves has been accepted, which I think is a fantastic thing for me as a councillor. At last I've achieved something. And also, but the trouble is, it'll probably take another couple of years to implement as well. But sometimes it's good to see that sometimes these things work, because I've always been frustrated in the past by LHI bids, as have many of the villages I represent. So to getting something changed in St Neots shows that, well, we'll show eventually that these things do work sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's some positive examples as well. It's more about the process and whether we can make. I'm generally a fan of making things quicker and more efficient.
Yeah. No, because you see it with the LHI stuff. It gets the window changes every year. It used to happen in the summer where we had the bid for applications window, and then it went to later in the year. Then it went over Christmas. Now it's into January, and you can just see it rolling over and getting later and later. And there's no need for those things. And we changed the way we do things in order to speed up decisions. And in fact, it seems to be even slower than ever as a consequence of that. So it's difficult problems to solve. But democracy has to be good. I mean, as a councillor, when you're sitting here on a 4-year term and we're getting towards the end of that 4-year term, you actually want to go back and say, here's some of the things I've achieved. And when things take so long, it's really quite difficult, isn't it? So, you want to make a difference as a council, and you want to be able to demonstrate that difference so you can hopefully get re-elected again if that's what you choose. And we'll all be making up the list of things we've achieved in the next few months as we start the campaign for the next year, if we're going to do that.
Well, it's interesting because when I got elected in 2021, there were like two very big things. One was like the kind of Eastern Access on Newmarket Road, so it's a GCP project, and then building like a new community center for the local area. And both those things haven't even started construction stage, and they've been, but the work that goes into those, and all those, as you say, so many hours of council meetings, of rounds of consultation, of so on. But I honestly thought someone who was obviously with no background in kind of the local authority structures before 2021 going into it, I'll be oh yeah, I mean I did for 4 years, all those big projects would at least kind of start. And I realized, oh wait a second, there's so many stages to it. There's of course so many important considerations as well. It's not only about delays due to unforeseen circumstances, but there are actually things in the process that I had no idea they had to be done. But then again, it depends what perspective you come from. People who are, I don't know, when people go and visit other countries and they're oh, but they have such new trains, and they have such new, all the buildings are so new. So, well, because I think it's fair to say in some countries planning works very differently.
Yeah.
Very differently. When you go to I don't know, on your holidays, and you say you see those very kind of technologically advanced things or pieces of infrastructure, things built very quickly, it's probably because I think it works just very differently, and it works very differently, including especially on this level of the regulations around consultation, around objections. And yeah, I mean, I remember growing up in Romania, if someone wanted to build something, I do think I was asked about. There's some process to it, but there's very little opportunity for shaping it at the local level. Which I think it's bad in a way, because I think sometimes the local knowledge and actually getting residents involved is really important to actually get a better project out of it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, in terms of if you just want something to be built very quickly, yes, then you go to another country and say, why do the trains in our country, or why does this piece of infrastructure looks like 30 years ago? It's because we haven't invested enough, and because things take ages.
Yeah, and we take most of our decisions in front of an empty public gallery with almost nobody watching online. But when we do take the controversial decisions, like Coton Orchard, like the STZ stuff, suddenly that's what does attract public interest and participation. So we can't have it both ways. It's good that people try to get involved in democracy. We just have to have better ways, I think, of recording and acting on their feelings. So yeah, I'm more and more in favour of things like citizens' assembly, so where everybody can have a voice, or the whole community can have a voice, and everybody's views are represented, rather than just a bunch of stale old councillors like you and me.
I'm not sure. I think in local government terms, I'm younger than I'm 45, so I have a good 15 years of being young in local council. So at least 3 terms of joining the young councillors weekend and conference.
If you get re-elected.
Well, that will be very interesting this year, I think. So I'll take this final question before we go to work. I think we did touch on this before, but I just want to take this like one last live question. Do you think the press played a role in the chaos we're seeing these days?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, you talked about Daily Mail and some of the inflammatory
Yeah.
headlines in the past that have set the scene for this. It does, because, for some people, that's how they view their opinions. And it's not, I mean, it's the press is a big part of it. I think they're a smaller part of it than they used to be, because I think social media has its own momentum and generates its own stories. But even watching the BBC last night, watching the news and hearing reports of the riots, and seeing the BBC, using that as an opportunity to give people a platform for they're never well considered opinions on immigration. I hate the vox pops quite often when people just make comments in the street. It's in some ways that legitimizes it, and I think we need to be able to take an actual pulse test of how most people feel in our society, because people on both sides of the debate, and I'm sure we're just as guilty of it as everybody else, feel like they sit in their own echo chambers and think that our views are the right views and don't take everybody else's views into account. I think we all got caught out by the Brexit thing on that, thinking, talking to our friends, our colleagues, and thinking that we knew everything was going on when we didn't. So I definitely think the media takes a role in this. I think if at least the print media was in a better place and was had more money and better journalists, we might be more reasoned. But at the moment, it's about shocking headlines that sell newspapers, and that's the problem with all of it, I think.
Yes, I think I do agree with that it's because a lot of the media, it is a commercial model, and of course, like having a headline saying the Romanians are invading the UK will make more money and will generate more readership, rightly or wrongly, than me doing an analysis of like breaking down what benefits you can claim and not as a migrant, and after how many years, and like how much it is per month and so on, and how that perhaps not an attractive offer compared to like social security in other countries, that alone, like as opposed to like coming here for work. So like that probably will be read by like 5 people who are really interested in the detail, whereas like scaring you with like Romanians like me being like coming in like huge millions of numbers, me coming with all my cousins to the UK, will obviously get more people to read the article. So I get the commercial like element of it. The problem is there's a fine line between like what kind of sells and how can I make money out of like news or like social media, and actually being irresponsible, and as the question suggests, actually legitimizing some of those views that then leads to very bad things happening in the country. But I do think, I'm in two minds about this, because whilst I think like, yes, people can blame, like Daily Mail headlines, historic headlines, or they can like blame like people saying irresponsible things on social media, I do think there's a level of like individual responsibilities. Like, yes, I'm also upset about many things, like, what's going on in like policy areas. I also perhaps like read things that like upset me, but I'm not going out like on the streets to like, have commit like various criminal acts and so on. So I do think it needs to be, of course, the media plays a role, but it needs to be like a level of responsibility for the individual to say, well, yes, if I'm concerned about this policy area or like I'm upset about this, I would actually use some appropriate channels and not try to burn down buildings perhaps. But I think this links to wider debates around obviously inequality, around like our education system more broadly, around how people feel trust or lack of trust in institutions and politicians. But at the end of the day, I can't just sit there and be like, well, I'm just blaming the media for brainwashing people, because I think there's a big level of personal responsibility in this.
Yep, I agree.
But on that note, on the note of personal responsibility, I do need to go to work. So
go do some work.
So good to see everyone this morning. We'll be back next Friday when we probably will discuss something more controversial in local politics. Topic yet to be decided. If you have any thoughts, please do post them in the comments and we'll address them next time. So See you next Friday.